There is something unsettling about the idea that your mind is running programs you never consciously installed. That right now, in your everyday conversations, your gestures, your silences, and your smallest decisions, you are deploying sophisticated psychological strategies that took evolution millions of years to develop without the faintest awareness that you're doing it. You're not manipulating people deliberately. You are not scheming. You're simply being human. And being human, it turns out, is far more psychologically complex than most of us ever stop to consider. The fascinating truth is that the majority of our social behavior operates below the level of conscious thought. Researchers estimate that somewhere between 90 and 95% of our daily decisions, reactions, and behaviors are governed by unconscious processes, which means that the version of yourself you think you are, the deliberate, rational, self-aware individual making considered choices, is in large part a story you tell yourself after the fact. The real action is happening backstage, and backstage, your brain is running tricks so sophisticated that even the world's best psychologists spent decades figuring out how they work. What follows is not a list of manipulation tactics used by con artists or cult leaders, though some of these principles are certainly exploited by people who understand them. These are the invisible psychological moves that ordinary people, including you, make every single day without knowing it. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them, and that, as you will discover, changes everything. The first trick begins with a door. Imagine someone approaches you with an enormous request, something so large that your immediate response is to say no. Then, after you decline, they follow up with a much smaller, more reasonable ask. And somehow you find yourself saying yes to the second request, even though you might have said no to it if it had been the first thing asked. This is called the door-in-the-face technique, and your brain falls for it because of a deeply wired sense of social reciprocity. When the other person appears to make a concession, scaling back their request, your mind registers this as a gesture of goodwill and feels compelled to meet them halfway. You believe you are being reasonable and cooperative. What you do not realize is that the large request was never the real ask. It was the setup. The second, smaller request was always the target. Now flip that around entirely. There is an equally powerful strategy that works from the opposite direction, and it's the one you are most likely using without knowing it. It starts small, almost embarrassingly small. You ask someone for a tiny favor, something so minor they would feel almost silly refusing. A small agreement, a little help, a quick yes. And then, gradually, the requests grow. By the time the asks are significant, the other person has already mentally categorized themselves as someone who helps you. They have committed to a self-image, and changing it now would create an uncomfortable internal conflict. Psychologists call this the foot-in-the-door technique, and it works because of something called cognitive consistency, the brain's powerful drive to behave in ways that match its existing beliefs about itself. One small yes, it turns out, is the seed of many larger ones. But here's where it gets stranger. You do not need to ask for anything at all to shape how someone sees themselves. Simply labeling a person changes their behavior. Tell a child they're a helper and they become more helpful. Tell an employee they are creative and they generate more ideas. Tell a voter they seem like someone who cares about civic participation and they are significantly more likely to actually vote. This is called the labeling effect, and it operates through the same mechanism, the human need to live up to the identity we believe we hold. The label becomes a mirror, and people dress to match their reflection. You have almost certainly done this without knowing it. You told a friend they were the brave one in the group. You told a colleague they had a gift for seeing solutions, and without knowing the psychology behind it, you quietly changed who they were. The next trick is one that happens in the silence between words. Think about the last time you asked someone a question and they gave you an incomplete or vague answer. Maybe they hesitated. Maybe they gave you half the story and stopped. Did you stay quiet and wait? If you did, you likely got far more than you bargained for. The power of silence in conversation is staggering and almost universally underestimated. When you stop talking and simply hold space, maintaining eye contact, staying present, not rushing to fill the gap, you create a social pressure that most people find almost unbearable. Silence feels like a demand. It implies that more needs to be said. And so, people talk. They elaborate, confess, explain, and reveal. The most skilled communicators in the world, negotiators, therapists, detectives, journalists, have mastered this trick, and the rest of us stumble into it accidentally, never quite understanding why some of our conversations go so much deeper than others. Connected to this is a trick that plays out in how we frame information, and it begins with the surprising discovery that people respond not to facts, but to the way facts are dressed. Imagine you are told that a surgery has a 90% survival rate. Now imagine you're told the same surgery has a 10% mortality rate. These are identical facts. The math is exactly the same. And yet, study after study shows that people respond to them as if they are completely different realities. The first inspiring confidence, the second triggering alarm. This is called the framing effect, and you use it constantly. When you describe a problem as a challenge rather than a threat, when you tell someone they did well on 9 out of 10 things rather than that they got one thing wrong, when you say a glass is nearly full rather than almost empty, you are framing. You are not lying, you are not distorting, you are simply choosing which true thing to lead with, and that choice shapes everything that follows. There's a related phenomenon that happens before a word is even spoken, a trick that involves what comes just before the main event. Researchers call it priming, and it works like this. The stimuli you are exposed to in the moments before an experience shape how you interpret that experience, often without your awareness. If you walk into a negotiation past a photograph of a wide-open landscape, you are subtly more likely to think expansively. If you sit in a chair that is hard and uncomfortable, you are measurably more likely to drive a hard bargain. If someone hands you a warm cup of coffee before asking your opinion of them, you'll likely find them warmer as a person. These effects are small but real, and we trigger them in each other constantly through the environments we invite people into, the music we play in our homes, the images on our walls. You are priming people all the time. The question is whether you are doing it in your favor. Perhaps the most socially powerful of all these invisible tricks is one that has to do not with what you say, but with what you notice. When someone is speaking to you, you are entirely there, not half thinking about what you'll say next, not glancing at your phone, not cataloging their words while composing your response. Fully, unreservedly present. And the extraordinary thing is that full presence is so rare in modern life that most people have almost never experienced it from another human being. When they encounter it, they remember it forever. They describe the person who gave it to them as magnetic, as one of the most interesting people they have ever met, even if that person barely said a word. Because what we are all seeking, beneath all the conversation and the performance and the strategy, is simply to be heard. And the person who offers that without asking for anything in return has mastered the deepest psychological trick of all. Not a manipulation, but a gift so uncommon it feels like a superpower. All 13 of these invisible moves have something in common. They work not because they exploit weakness, but because they speak directly to the most fundamental needs of the human nervous system. The need to belong, to matter, to be understood, to feel safe, and to be seen. The most remarkable part is not that people use these strategies without knowing it. The most remarkable part is what that tells us about human beings at their core. Beneath all our complexity, all our defensiveness, all our carefully constructed masks, we are creatures of breathtaking simplicity. We just want to connect. And every unconscious trick in this list is, at its root, nothing more than the mind finding its way, however imperfectly, back to that one essential truth.